She argues in the book Lo-TEK that ancient cultures used nature to engineer tools and machinery to make life easier. But, she says at the same time, they stayed environment-friendly. From bridges made of tree branches to sewage systems that don't need electricity, Watson explores thousands of years of human wisdom and ingenuity from Peru to India, Iraq, and the Philippines. Julia Watson joins me now. Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for coming on our show today. So, you, in the book, say that we are ignoring millennia-old knowledge of how to live in symbiosis with nature. Why are we doing that?
I think that there's been a fascination with the future and technology that has been part of the paradigm of development for the last century. And I think we've really forgotten and lost a lot of the understanding that Indigenous people have about how to actually live with nature and how to develop with nature. We haven't seen that it's been actually a really important part of human survival. And it hasn't been until now, when we're confronting climate crises, that we really start to understand that our natural systems and our natural landscapes and the health of natural systems on our Earth is really integrally connected to human beings and human survival and the functioning of society and of cities. And we've also had this understanding that Indigenous knowledge is primitive, and that is really a myth that's debunked in the book. And we really start to confront the idea that Indigenous knowledge that's gained over millennia is really innovative, and it's innovative beyond what we have the ability to innovate at this point in time in design.
Okay, this book might easily sound like you're against the idea of technology, but is that what it is?
No, not at all. I think that the book is really trying to open up our eyes towards the idea that technology can be nature-based, and that's an idea about technology that really hasn't been integrated into our thinking yet. That technology isn't always digital, that analog technology that really is integrated with nature is also a form of technology that is sophisticated and complex and can be used to the benefit of building cities and understanding how to relate with nature when we're building our cities.
So are you saying that this is the way we live all around the world?
Not all around the world, definitely not. I think in parts of the world, yes, we have very much forgotten that there's a very close kinship and symbiotic relationship with nature in our cities. And that's just been the way that the last century has sort of allowed us to develop and progress. But now we're at a point where we need to recalibrate that. But in developing countries, we can see that there are still ways that people are developing in close harmony with nature, and also in Indigenous societies on the other spectrum, people are still living very closely with nature and interacting with nature as they progress. So it's not, we haven't forgotten that. In some cases we've lost that, but the knowledge is still there to be gained.
So let's just think about the bushfires in Australia, for example. Do you think that wisdom from Indigenous people could have helped any of that devastation?
Yeah. I mean, what's happening in Australia is absolutely catastrophic and devastating. I was there 2 weeks ago. I'm Australian myself. And there are news articles that are coming out now that are documenting that people who actually introduced cultural burning, which is pyrotechnology, which is an ancient form of forest conservation and preservation and rehabilitation, those properties, those communities who have practiced that type of cultural burning are not being affected by the fires. And so there's a proof in case that this type of understanding and this type of wisdom, when integrated into contemporary practices of forest management and land management, are actually incredibly effective.
Okay, so you argue in the book that ancient cultures used to engineer tools to make life easier. But Julia, life wasn't that easy in ancient times, was it?
No, I'm not sure that the book states that it makes life easier. I think it's more that it was a necessity, and that these times that we're experiencing now of really catastrophic floods and fires and devastating droughts, those types of extreme weather events have been happening for a very long time. And sometimes the Indigenous communities who are living in our remotest and most fragile environments have actually been experiencing those in a way that would be more exacerbated or amplified than other communities. And so they've actually been able to deal with these types of extreme events and adapt to them and integrate different types of technologies that allow them to adapt in a very sophisticated way to these extreme weather events for a really long time. It wasn't that life was easier, it was just a necessity, as it is a necessity now, for us to start to consider how we can integrate nature-based technology to deal with the same types of conditions on perhaps a more global and a larger scale that can be more catastrophic because it affects more people in more urbanized, dense, populated areas.
Okay, so we keep talking about ideas and theories, but then what needs to be done? Like, what is the first step, for example, that should be taken?
I think the first step is to recognize that there are technologies out there that are not high-tech, that are going to be incredibly vital for us to understand and to integrate into the way that urban designers, city planners, environmentalists, engineers, anybody who's out there in the field, and even policymakers, to integrate this type of understanding and to take on this low-tech movement and to build that into the way that we understand cities and to reestablish the connection that human survival is really dependent upon the survival of our natural systems and the health of our natural systems. And that's sort of the larger macro. On the micro scale, each country or each nation, they have their own resilient technologies that are embedded in their landscapes. Historically, in China, they have different types of polder dike systems, which are similar to the Netherlands' polder dike systems, the same as in Indonesia. In Indonesia, we saw last week 400,000 people being displaced from floodwaters. But there are techniques that are nature-based technologies that can assist to mitigate those types of impacts. So I think really it's understanding that technology doesn't have to be high-tech. The solution doesn't have to be high-tech and really expensive. It can be low-cost. It can be culturally relative. It can adapt to natural conditions and context, and that each country has their own resilient technologies that can assist them in adapting to climate change.
Okay, Julia Watson, thank you so much for joining us on Showcase today.
Thank you.